Awesome. Okay, thanks so much for joining, everyone. It looks like the participant count has kind of slowed down, so we can get started. Welcome to the ESS-DIVE's March 2024 webinar. My name is Emily Robles. I'm a Senior Research Associate working with ESS-DIVE. And today I'm going to be walking through the status of reporting format usage in ESS-DIVE, as well as version 2.0 changes to the file-level metadata reporting format that are upcoming. And we will have plenty of time throughout this hour to discuss, and we're hoping to get some feedback on proposed changes. So really looking forward to it and happy to have you all here. Let's see. And I wanted to just get started with a poll. So we have a poll everywhere link, which Dylan, if you could share that in the chat, that would be great. And this should be activated. And I just want to get a sense of familiarity with reporting formats. It's totally fine if you have never even heard of them, but I would love to know if any of you have used the reporting formats before, if you've heard of them, haven't used them, or if you have kind of active plans to use at least one of them in the future. So I'll give a couple minutes or a couple moments for responses to these. Looks like we have a few no familiarity. That's great to see. Awesome. Well, it looks like we don't have anyone who's heard of them, but doesn't plan to use them. So that's good. All right. Okay, well, it looks like responses have slowed down. So that's great to see. We have a couple with no familiarity, and that's totally fine. Hopefully we'll be able to give a high enough overview for you today. And then we have a couple who have planned to use at least one of them in the future, and a couple who have already used them in one or more data sets. So that is great to see. Can move forward. So just to give kind of that high level overview, and especially for those of you who responded that you haven't used reporting formats before or haven't heard of reporting formats before. So essentially ESS-DIVE funded multiple community projects with the purpose of developing guidelines for structuring specific data and metadata. So the results were 13 different reporting formats that offer multiple level of guidance, from structuring and formatting data to describing data and even the organization of specific data types in and of themselves. And so as you can see, we have these kind of split into formats for data files and formats for metadata. And today we're going to be focusing on that file level metadata that you can see right down here. And I've also included the citation to a paper that came out at the kind of publication point of the reporting formats if you'd like to learn more about how they were developed and how they were synthesized. So at this point, there are 90 data sets that are using reporting formats that are publicly available in the ESS-DIVE data repository. And as we can see from this graph, that file level metadata is the highest represented. So all 90 data sets are using that file level metadata reporting format. And I'll describe why that is in a moment, but I just want to give kind of a look at the fact that we do have some of those data type specific reporting formats, such as the water, soil, sediment chemistry, and the hydrologic monitoring reporting formats that are also being used. And this is really great to see early adoption, and it's really helped us implement tools that you're going to see throughout the rest of this presentation, but also get an idea of feedback and pain points and challenges that we love to hear about and learn more about. So as I said, some data sets are using multiple reporting formats, and that's because of the workflow that actually encourages using multiple where appropriate. So initially, a data contributor we recommend looking at kind of the high-level reporting formats that can apply to a wide range of data types. So these are the CSV file structures, samples, identifiers, and metadata, model data, and locations metadata. And then moving on to more domain-specific reporting formats that are very tailored to certain data types. And that's in step B. And then for step C, we have providing file-level metadata on its own. And so the file-level metadata reporting format can be used to describe the files in any data set, regardless of the data type or previously chosen reporting formats. So that's its own step, regardless of this step A and B. And then finally, in the workflow, when you're submitting to ESS-DIVE, either through the web form or the API, you will include a standard set of package level metadata as well. So file level metadata really plays an important role, as you can see kind of in that workflow. It's really recommended for all data sets. And it consists of two files. So the reporting format in and of itself has a file level metadata file. Sorry, just got an update notification. And in that file, each row contains information about all of the files in a data set. So you're essentially describing all of the contents of your data set. And then there's another file, a data dictionary file, where each row contains the header row and column information of individual files. So these are describing the variables within a single CSV file. And together, the file level metadata reporting format enables advanced search capabilities through a tool called the ESS-DIVE Fusion Database, which has been developed using the file level metadata reporting format. So this is just a high level glance at the Fusion database. And I hope this doesn't get too in the weeds, but I want to set the stage for the eventual changes that we are proposing to the file level metadata reporting format, and hopefully this will show you why. So the Fusion database, initially right now, it's supporting the most common data format, which is comma separated values, or CSVs, and then the file level reporting format. So the Fusion database has an automation pipeline that can essentially introspect into data files themselves. It extracts, summarizes, and indexes all data in data sets using the file level metadata reporting format, and it provides both error feedback to the ESS-DIVE team. And this whole process allows for advanced search of extracted data through something called the Deep Dive API, which is this last step. So we begin in this data set monitoring, which watches for data sets in the publication review process that are using reporting formats. And it also checks for newly published data that's ready for this last step in the Deep Dive API. Once it identifies data sets, then there are data processing pipelines that do multiple things. They validate the reporting formats, parse CSV data files, report feedback for publication review, which comes to the ESS-DIVE support team, and then they also prepare data for the Deep Dive API. And so once data moves over to the indexing, it's actually made publicly available for search and discovery through this Deep Dive API tool. But for all of that to happen, the data set has to be, again, using the file level metadata reporting format, but it also has to be following the guidelines specifically to allow for the validation. So what happens is if a file comes in that's not correctly formatted, then the Fusion database will give errors back and essentially say why the data set wasn't able to be parsed. So at this point, 20 data sets are being fully and successfully parsed by the Fusion database, and that data is available through the Deep Dive Search API. And so because of this early adoption, we've also been able to really get a look at common errors and pain points that we're seeing. And a big one is kind of incorrect naming of the FLMD and data dictionary fields. So those fields that are describing either data files or data variables. The required variable names are either in the incorrect format or just small spelling errors, things like that. Another really common issue that we see are parsing errors in CSVs themselves. So variable names that have spaces or special characters or UTF-8 errors, encoding errors. And then we also see problems that arise from incorrect data orientation as defined in the file level metadata. And we'll talk about all those errors a little bit more, and also chat about the changes in the version update that are addressing these. But I just want to point out that when you're submitting a data set to ESS-DIVE for publication, all of these errors are going to be communicated directly to you by the ESS-DIVE publication team. So you will not have to deal with any of these errors on your own. We will not just, reject a data set without telling you what's happening. And so I want to just give a quick look into how you can expect that feedback to be given to you.
And Marie, can you just,
can
you clarify the 20 data sets? Those are things that everything is parsed and then there's some incomplete.
Yes.
There's over 100 data sets that have used this, right? So there's some incomplete parsing. So if you could clarify that, that would be great.
Yeah, exactly. So as we saw kind of earlier in that graph showing the use of reporting formats, there are 90 data sets that are using the file level metadata reporting format. So ideally, we want to see this count of data sets being successfully parsed somewhere closer to that 90. But because of these really common errors and sometimes very small errors, the Fusion database isn't correctly parsing through specific data sets. And so only 20 of them are making it all the way through this pipeline. Hopefully that helps to clarify a bit. And feel free also, we will have time to discuss before jumping into the next phase talking about version 2 changes, but if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we have ESS-DIVE team members that can also help address those. Awesome. So I just wanted to give a quick overview of what a normal publication review process looks like. So when you request publication, you will receive a confirmation email from the ESS-DIVE team, and your data set joins a queue of publication requests that are then manually reviewed by the ESS-DIVE publication team. And in this review and revise stage, revision request emails will be sent directly from ESS-DIVE and will work with you one-on-one to address issues in your data set. So for example, in package level metadata, we have specific requirements for the length of your abstract. And so if details like that or essentially we go through sorry, I just completely lost my train of thought. We go through our review process and send revision requests directly to you before publication. And then if no revisions are needed or all revision requests have been addressed, the new data set is published with a DOI and a confirmation message is sent directly to you. This is a very high level, just 1, 2, 3 step of the publication process. And if you're using reporting formats, the only thing that's a little bit different is this review and revise section. Because at this point, not only will you receive feedback on your package level metadata and whether your data set has met ESS-DIVE's publication requirements, but you'll also receive the results of file level review, which is a new component of the publication workflow when a data set is using reporting formats. So this review occurs at the time of publication request, along with standard data set review. The validation results from the Fusion database that we saw earlier are directly informing this feedback, and the file level feedback is provided along with all other revision requests if they're relevant. Now, once your data set is published, it enables enhanced search through the Deep Dive API, which we spoke about earlier. So this is a separate tool from the ESS-DIVE main search, and it allows for the search of data within dataset files themselves. So once the Fusion database parses successfully through a dataset and it's able to extract data, those data points become available through the Deep Dive API. And published data sets that have been using the reporting formats have really been instrumental to enabling advanced search and the development of this tool. So again, I want to recognize the early adopters of the reporting formats. And at this time, the Deep Dive API is available for use. And we do have an interactive API that you can visit at this link. But just to get an idea of the things that you can search for, the search parameters at this time are DOIs, field names, record counts, and field values. So this is a look at what that interactive API looks like. So for example, if you wanted to define a field name, if you're looking for a specific site, you can define the parameter field name and the field value text with the name of a site, and it'll actually return to you the data sets and data files where that field value is found. So it's a really powerful way to quickly search within data sets and within data files for the data that you're looking for. So I'm going to pause at this point. I know that that was a lot of information, just kind of walking through the current state of reporting format data sets in ESS-DIVE, kind of that overview of what's going on with the Fusion database and the requirements for making your data available in the Deep Dive API. But I want to pause and see if there are any questions or comments at this time. Yes, I see a hand raised.
Yes, I have a question. So my my question is that is there any files to show is there any an example of file to show us how we will fill those form or how we will report those metadata for each type of files? So yeah, so is there any example for us to follow?
Yes, so there are example templates that you can follow for the file level metadata reporting format. It has both the file level metadata file and data dictionary file templates available, and those are on our GitHub documentation. I don't know if anyone from the ESS-DIVE team is able to share the link to that. Let's see. Thank you for that question, though. Let's see if I did this. Hi, Val.
Hey, I just wanted to make one clarification on one of the slides. I can't remember which one, the number, but it was where you said only 20 data sets are available to search in the deep dive API. There are probably only 20 data sets where all of the files have completely successfully been parsed, but there are many data sets in there that have been partially, like a lot of the files have parsed, maybe one or two files have not, had issues. The data files, all the data files that have been successfully parsed, whether or not, there were other errors in a data set, those all make it into the deep dive API. So just wanted to clarify what that 20 data sets means, that all of the files in the data set were successfully parsed, but there are many, many where maybe one or two files weren't successfully parsed, and but all the other ones were.
Great. Thank you for that clarification, Rob. Sorry, let me open that link and it kicked me out of. Oh no. Sorry, I accidentally opened up the link on the wrong window. Okay. Are there any other questions? I see, Val, your hand's still up. I don't know if that's another question or, okay, just left over. Okay. Oh, Terry. Hi.
Where are there instructions for using the deep dive API? I'm on the page where it is, but I'm not that good at navigating this kind of stuff.
Yeah, let's see.
Val, do you want to take that?
Yeah.
So if you go to fusion.ess-dive.lbl.gov, it's probably thinks it's intuitively telling you how to use it. We are developing a notebook that we'll release, but there's no documentation per se. It's a Swagger API. So basically you go into the different, and Emily, if you could bring it up just so we can.
Yeah, let me just switch over my screens.
So if you go up,
Emily, could you scroll to the top?
Yeah, scroll to the top, Emily.
This is the top.
Oh. Okay.
Oh, expand default.
Can you just refresh the page? Yeah, expand default. There we go. Little caret there on the right.
Sorry, this one?
If you just refreshing the page maybe, or I'm not sure why the default view is not coming up.
Is that showing correctly?
I don't think we can see what you see, Emily.
Yeah, I think you're on a
really?
different page. Maybe that's why.
Yeah, you need to.
Okay, let me try and restart.
No worries.
Is that showing?
Yeah, there we go. So collapse this real quick. Oh, nope, not that one.
There you go.
Expand that, yeah.
That
And
one,
then, yeah.
okay.
So here you see that there are two endpoints. One is for querying data, and one is for getting the data file. Open the query data one. And if you just want to, if you want to try it out, you just click this try it out button here. And then all of these search fields become active. And if you go down, don't enter it, you can search on anything, or you can just click execute just to see what it returns. And go down, and that's the first page of results. It'll give you 25 pages of results. And we do have one slide deck that kind of explains a little bit, but we are working on some notebooks and other things to more fully explain.
Yeah, thanks, Val. Yeah, I think the idea behind this is that Swagger is supposed to be self-documenting, but it's probably more suited to people who are kind of deeply immersed in the API world and using this sort of interface. So Terry, we can come up with more user-friendly documentation for this in this notebook, and then potentially just more details for that kind of guide you through the process.
Yeah, and this is very programmer friendly, because the idea here is that we develop the API, we figure out what are the deficiencies, we add more support, and the UI will come later to support on top of it.
Thanks.
True. With you.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know if you called on me or looked like I wasn't sure if Terry wanted to speak, but yeah, just so you know that we, I think, are planning to have a more sort of, easier version of documentation like we do for the other API. It's something that's in the works, right? And then we do have, as Val was mentioning, some example notebooks that are being developed that aren't public yet. That'll show you some uses of this Fusion database. So we'll have a separate follow-up webinar at some point later in this year, specifically focused on the Fusion database. I think one of the reasons why we haven't done this yet is in part because of these sort of issues we're seeing with the parsing of some of these data sets. So what we're recognizing that it's first important for us to get the reporting formats, one revised, which is what Emily's going to talk about next, but also sort of having you all as part of the community weigh in on, we're making these recommendations in order, as we've done this parsing through the Fusion database, we're realizing that there were certain things we didn't think about earlier that need to be modified in the upcoming versions of the reporting format. So this is just more of a preview for, for you all to understand the rationale for why we're making changes to the formats. And that's our first priority. And then as we start to clean up more data sets and as we start to parse more, the Fusion database will become more powerful. So we just think it'll be better to wait a little bit longer before we do a full demonstration. So you can really do sort of a more rich search and discovery. But it is working. And so if any of you want to play around, this is what we have. But when we augment our documentation and have notebooks, it'll be much easier to use.
Thanks, Shara. All right. Are there any other questions at this point? Is this screen showing again?
Looks good.
Presentation? Okay, thanks. All right. Something in the chat. Oh, okay, thanks. All right, so now we are going to move forward with discussing the version changes for the file-level metadata reporting format. So as Charu kind of mentioned, a lot of these revisions are coming out of both the Fusion database validation errors, but also they've really been heavily informed by community feedback from early adopters. And so our main goals were to make the file-level metadata reporting format easier to follow. And a component of that is reducing clutter from optional fields and redundancy across other reporting formats. Also providing much more clarification and documentation where it's needed based off of feedback, and improving harmonization across reporting formats, which is kind of a larger goal, both within the file level metadata and across also the more data type specific reporting formats. And we'd also love to see, again, that number of total complete data sets successfully parsing increase. So I want to start off by just kind of giving the overview of the version 1 requirements and recommendations. So as you can see, there were a lot of optional fields. The required fields are file name and file description. We had 2 recommended fields, and then a lot of optional fields. And what we've done with version 2 is not change those required fields at all. But we have pared down both the optional and recommended field. So for recommended fields, we are keeping the standard field, which essentially is a place to note if a singular data file is following some type of defined standard, whether it's a reporting format or another type of standard, and we'll talk about modifications to that field in a moment. I do want to point out that there are 2 new optional fields, header rows and column or row name position, and we'll also talk about those in a moment. The optional fields have been pared back quite a bit, and this missing value codes, which has been an optional field, is actually going to be moving to the data dictionary file. So that's just a very brief overview. I want to first jump into the header rows and position variables, since these are new optional variables that you can use to describe singular data files in the file level metadata. So this was something that came out of community feedback and kind of confusion with what to do if there are header rows either before the variable names or after the variable names, but before the data begins. And so what we're proposing is a header rows variable to be used when there are rows after the variable or header names, but before data begins. So providing the number of header rows that occur after kind of those column or row names in a file. But we quickly realized that there are use cases in which those header rows may be above the actual variable names and not in between the variable names and when the data begins. And so to address that, there is kind of a follow-up optional field, which is column or row name position, to be used when these rows or columns, if your data is oriented that way, occur before the variable names. And I do want to note that if these aren't included, it'll be assumed that the header rows are in row 1 if a horizontal orientation, or column 1 if a vertical orientation. Let's see. So Danielle asks, is a row considered a header row if it uses the hash symbol to indicate it is a comment? That is a really good question, and that is something that we have seen. Thank you for reminding me. And the answer is no. So any rows that have a hash mark when they're hashed out or commented out, those are automatically skipped in parsing. So in these examples, I did not include those. This is if a data file just has unhashed, uncommented metadata or information before or after the variable names. Let's see. Could you provide examples of these fields in a file?
So maybe, yeah, I think
yeah.
maybe just translating, like, here's what it might be useful for people to see. Here's what it looks like when you have something that says header row position blah, and this is what it looks like in practice. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but like use of that row, that field in an FLMD, and then what that looks like in the file. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah. That makes
And
sense.
maybe you have an
So
example later, so yeah.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So essentially, this is a column within the file level metadata file. So for example, I can do the header rows as an example. So if this was your data file and you're filling out a file level metadata file and you want to include this header rows variable, you would put 2 for the count of the header rows. Does that kind of help to answer that, Sherry?
I mean, honestly,
Sorry.
if you have an example, like I think that would be really sort of instructive to just pop up a file level metadata, but we could do it afterwards. It's fine. I don't want to cause too much
Okay.
of a.
Yeah, no worries. We can maybe just go through the rest of the changes and then I can totally pull up a template of the file level metadata and we can go through if there's any additional questions. The next field that isn't changing in and of itself, it's still an optional field, is the file level metadata standard field. So each reporting format has a package level keyword to be used when submitting the data set to ESS-DIVE, but it also has a term that should be used in the file level metadata standard field. So what we're doing in this version 2 update is actually including a set of terms for each of the ESS-DIVE reporting formats to be used in this field. So this is just an example of a couple of the reporting formats and what the FLMD standard term will look like to be used within the file level metadata file. If there's any questions, again, feel free to put them in the chat. And then, let's see. Okay, there's a question from Brianne. So regarding automatically skipping the hashed rows, this means the first row of data in the water, soil, and sediment chemistry reporting format is being skipped. I know there's a plan to update that reporting format in the future, but is there any time or any plan for that data in the meantime? So let's see, Brian, just to make sure I'm understanding, so you're asking if there's any plan to not skip those rows or to incorporate data from those rows?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there's anything else we should be doing since it has that hashtag start data in that column. If there's, I guess, if that data is the plan for right now is just to skip that data or what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, so that is the current plan, just because we haven't moved on towards kind of revising any data type specific reporting formats at this time. Yeah, but we'll definitely have to have kind of continued conversation about how we want to incorporate that information. Because right now, yes, it is going to be skipped if it has the hash.
Yeah, and maybe just a bigger picture. I think as we evolve these in the future, kind of at round 2 of our ESS-DIVE, you know, if there are things that you've done that were compliant with an old reporting format, I think we will probably also look on our side in terms of just automating some of these conversions and whatnot, because we realize it's a pain to have to. So we haven't quite figured out the exact plan for that, but there will be more automation in terms of when people submit data, being able to convert that sort of thing and you know, not have to put that on the users.
That's great,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay, I see a couple questions in the chat, so I'm going to go back to the standard. So Danielle asked, for the standard field, would the keyword vocabulary be recognized if it is used instead of the FLMD vocabulary or only the FLMD term? Let's see. Okay, perfect. So this actually ties in really well with BB's question as well. So right now, the FLMD standard field is not being used by the Fusion database. So creating kind of a controlled list of vocabulary for this field comes both out of kind of confusion and recommendation from users, but also kind of looking into the future, a need to be able to identify specific files of specific reporting formats. So understanding, if we do need to build in some allowances for validation of certain reporting format data files, we need to know where those files are and which reporting format they are following. So this isn't a field that we're using right now actively in the Fusion database, but it's kind of looking forward. We want to be able to identify what standard those files are following. And so in that case, only this standard short name is going to be used in the file level metadata. And the reason why we made them a little bit different is it was requested that we make this file level metadata name a bit shorter and easier to use within the file level metadata file itself. Can the keyword be changed? Yeah, so that's a good question, Danielle. The reason why we didn't make them the same was because we're including this component of versioning in the FLMD standard name, and we didn't include that at the keyword level. So not only is it shorter, but it has that additional information of version. Whereas the keyword at the package level, we wanted that to maintain its integrity and stay the same. We didn't want to have to recommend updating and changing that whenever, if a version update to the reporting formats happened. But that is good feedback, and we can definitely think about maybe allowing that keyword to be used in the FLMD standard field as well, or how we can kind of navigate that. Terry?
I think there was a question from BB before that about the column and the spellings. And in terms of Fusion database parsing, I mean, typically what happens is we will run sort of validation on the fields, and if if it basically says, oh, it's not we don't recognize the standard, that should hopefully pop up in the validation. And maybe that'll be feedback for you, like, oh wait, that should have popped up and it didn't pop up. So that's kind of one level of being able to catch that kind of error or accidental typo. But yeah, sorry, Terry.
This is just to follow on with that for the keywords and the metadata, because I have to go and look it up and cut and paste. It'd be nice if there was a checklist or a drop down so that it was easy to enter that in. I know if it's not in there and you see it in our review, then you'll ask if you can put it in, but we've been trying to put it in before then. But again, it's a cut and paste kind of thing.
So just to understand though, these are files that you guys are putting together, because they're Excel files or CSVs. So where would that drop down live? I just trying to understand the ask here.
We've been asked that keyword is inserted in the metadata record under keywords.
Oh, gotcha. Sorry, I misunderstood.
Oh, switch gears, not the data set. Yeah, not the FLMD. But...
Got it. Okay, sorry. Totally ignore that question. I was totally thinking of something else. My bad.
So Terry, just to clarify, what you're asking for is a list in the web interface where within the drop-down list of keywords, we would have you be able to easily pick which reporting format it is. Am I understanding that correctly then?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, thank you. That's doable.
Yeah, that is really helpful feedback. Brianne, let's see, is there language for the FLMD reporting format, or is the plan to always use the file name for the FLMD? Sorry, could you maybe clarify that, Brianne? I'm not sure.
Yeah, on the
I'm
screen, I
understanding that.
don't see like a row for the FLMD as a reporting format to include in the standard column or as a keyword. I know there is a keyword, but is there a standard that we put in that column, or are you just relying on the file name?
Sorry, yeah. So this is actually, this isn't a complete list. This was just the first couple, because all 13 was a bit of a squish. So the file level metadata keyword should be put at the package level. And then I believe we
Hey,
do
Emily, can I
not.
just jump in
Oh,
real quick?
yeah.
We are relying on the file name
On the
because
name, yeah.
we can't know what format the file is by opening the FLMD file. Can't be self-referential, really. I mean, I know people put the FLMD in there, but we do need to rely on the file name. So that's a really good question.
Great, thank you. And is that relying on the file name, is that specifically for the FLMD, or does it expand beyond that?
And the data dictionaries, but with the use of standardization for the standard, you know, we can at least know that I have to think about that. Right now, we are relying on the file names for the data dictionaries and the FLMD. When we start seeing use of the standards, we're going to use the standard to know what kind of files are going to be in there. And those different reporting formats do have specifications for naming conventions for the files, and we will always rely on those naming conventions. But we will use the standard to tell us what kind of files we should find in this data set, right? So if, Amplicon, and I'm not totally in the weeds of all of these, but, if someone says, oh, Amplicon is in here, I should find at least the required files in there, so.
Oh, sorry. I think you went on mute, Val.
I just said I, meaning I am the Fusion Fusion database, don't mean to make me synonymous with that. Let's just decouple that.
Thank you.
Awesome. I know we are running close to time, so I just want to make sure I cover these last few points, and then we'll have room for more discussion. So the next change and an issue that we have encountered a lot with the Fusion database is validation errors when variable capitalization was inconsistent with the FLMD reporting format standard. So these are for the required fields for the file level metadata and data dictionary that we were seeing issues with this. So for example, with file name, which is a required field in the FLMD file, the reporting format basically says that it needs to be in this capitalization of capital F file underscore capital N name. And so what we were seeing is if datasets, copy and paste or typing in or whatnot, there were issues and inconsistencies with the capitalization that was causing the Fusion database to throw errors, even if there were small inconsistencies. And so to address this in our version 1.1 or version 2, we've actually changed that, so sorry about the typo. We've decided to move forward with strongly recommending snake case, and this is also in an attempt to kind of harmonize across reporting formats. So when we publish the version 2.0 documentation, we will be moving our templates over to snake case. However, it will only be a strong recommendation, and we will actually be allowing for different capitalization if either you're following the version 1 templates or if there's just kind of human error with different capitalization of those mandatory fields, those will be accepted. So that is a change that will hopefully enable the parsing of a couple more of those data sets that we're seeing issues with. And then finally, I just want to touch on data orientation. This isn't a field that is changing at all, but it is one that we have gotten feedback on and will be improving the documentation of. So I just want to clarify that there are 2 options for noting data orientation for CSV files within the file level metadata, and this is an optional field still. So orientation can either be horizontal with the names of each field at the top of each column, or vertical with the names at the start of each row. And this guidance has been a little bit confusing. So we've recommended thinking, how is data being added to my data table? If when you are adding data to your table, you are adding a new row, then that is a horizontally oriented data table. If when you're adding a new data point, you're adding a new column, then that is a vertical orientation. So we will be improving the documentation for version 2, but this field is not changing and it is still optional. But hopefully that'll help to clarify a bit. I see your question. Does the snake case naming convention apply to just variables or also to data file names? So this is just to variables. So these are just the fields within the file level metadata reporting format. So each of, let's see, just these required fields. Yeah, hopefully that helps to clarify. Awesome. Yes, so, okay, let's see. I'll answer Phoebe's question first. So going back to the orientation, horizontal is the default orientation. So assuming that the column names are organized in a column fashion and the data is horizontally oriented. And then Danielle asked, is there a benefit to changing FLMD field names to snake case since it is not required? So the move to snake case was mostly an attempt to kind of harmonize across all of the reporting formats since there was a lot of different capitalization going on and different kind of formats of even the same or similar variables. But it's also kind of using snake case is a bit more common, especially in programming and looking at variable names. So when looking to harmonize across the reporting formats, it just came to the top as kind of the best option. But I do want to stress that it's still backwards compatible and we are allowing both the original naming convention for those required, recommended, and optional fields, as well as other capitalization if errors are made and whatnot.
Val? Val, you had your hand up.
Oh,
I didn't mean to do that.
Okay. Awesome. So our goal for the version 2 finalization is to have and accept feedback until April 5th. And up until that point, we'll be revising documentation and, as I said, updating templates and guidance. And then our goal is to finalize and publish all of these changes before the Cyber Infrastructure Working Group and ESS PI meetings, which are starting April 15th. And I do want to also shout out that we will be leading a hands-on tutorial session during the Cyber Infrastructure Working Group meeting on April 15th. So at this point, if there are any questions, feel free to ask them. I had kind of some leading discussion questions, but if any points need clarification, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I think also just making it clear that this is sort of a public comment period on these changes. And if any of you feel strongly about any of the changes, please provide feedback to us so that we can finalize this before the PI meeting on the, actually the cyber infrastructure meeting on the 15th. So ideally within the next week or so would be good to get feedback if there's anything in here that doesn't sort of, that is problematic for you. Or if you like it, that too is fine.
Okay, I know we only have a minute left, but if there aren't any actual questions, I did want to kind of get an idea for people who have used the FLMD reporting format. If there are any challenges that you face that you think could be addressed by something in a version 2 revision that we haven't mentioned today. Even if it's just confusion with a particular field. Okay. All right, well, we are right at time. So as always, feel free to reach out and ask questions. Oh. Phoebe, you had mentioned moving the missing value code to the data dictionary. Will there be other changes to the data dictionary coming up? So no, there are no changes to the data dictionary fields other than moving that optional missing value code variable over to that file. But yeah, there are no changes to the actual content of the data dictionaries. And I do want to stress that that is still an optional field. So if for whatever reason you want to include it in the file level metadata file, additional fields are still accepted in that file. They're just ignored if they're not one of the required fields. So if, for your needs, you want to continue including it in that file, that's perfectly fine. It's just not something that's going to be recognized by the Fusion database. Should there be a separate DD for the FLMD file? That is a good question. The FLMD does not need to be included in a data dictionary. Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Terry. Awesome. Okay, well, if there aren't any other questions, I think that we can end here. And again, feel free to reach out with comments or feedback, and we'll send a follow-up message as well. Thanks, BB.